And I have papers for you guys to start off with. Hey, can you guys stop talking to each other? Thank you. A couple of people had a paper that maybe I asked you to work on a little more, okay? That's not an insult. And it's not because I'm mean, I'm honestly. It's just, hardly anyone ever writes something that's good on the first time. Do you know what I mean? So I'm being really, really lenient, but okay, some people didn't give me a simile, and I was very specific, it needs a simile. And I know, but don't have that look, Julie. It's like, there's always the panic-stricken look in every class. It's like, Mrs. Ferguson doesn't love me anymore because I didn't put a simile. This is not true. This is not true. But we have to learn to follow directions. So sometimes I feel like if you don't remember anything about Greece and Rome, but you learn to follow directions, like then we did a good thing. Because it's really, really important. If I just didn't understand, or I didn't think that you really had a problem, like you said, this is from this story, but wait, but do you realize what the problem in that original story is? Where is the problem? So don't take it too hard. Also, almost all of you type it, and so it's really super easy to make corrections. So that's my speech. But please don't ever, ever, ever take it personally. It's not personal at all. It's just, well, I asked you to do a simile and you didn't give me a simile, so now give me a simile. All right? So just no worries. And you don't have to peek at your neighbor. You don't have to make fun of them. Because that was a prime slide there. Did you see that slide? Okay, Preston's not here. And Evelyn, I have another one. I have a Clara. I have a Juliana. This was fascinating to me. I read, I wanted to know what was going to happen. Legit wanted to know. I didn't have to go get tea and then, I have to go read the rest of Emma's paper. It was I wonder what she's going to do. So it was amazing. Luke and Grace. Did everybody get a paper that thought they should get a paper? Okay, and I've got...
Oh, no. In answer to this, no, I didn't make it up myself. Nemesis appeared in one of the what this book's I'm reading.
Oh, okay.
It's a good description and appeared as one of the main characters in Hated.
Yes, because I knew Nemesis is a Greek goddess, but I just didn't know, I didn't remember it being in the Greek myth book. I'm like, I wonder where she picked up Nemesis. So, okay, does anybody have... Hey, guys. Does anybody have a question? I wrote something on your paper and you don't know why. And Christian, yes, apparently everybody's looked at your paper. So I just, the problem is Demeter is sad. The problem isn't so much kidnapping, the problem is, because that's the origin of the seasons, right? So maybe you could put somebody, it doesn't have to be completely altered. Maybe you could put a sad character who grieves about the missing Aphrodite, also a simile. On the flip side, Christian, hey, shh. On the flip side, it was very exciting. And the cheesecake was a nice touch. Okay.
Oh, cheesecake.
Did anybody have trouble doing the second paragraph of the Sparta paper? No. Reading and finding something that was interesting or important? Maybe a little bit. Was it the fact that you just didn't find it interesting?
Well, government is boring to a lot of people, so it's hard to find anything interesting.
Okay,
so
granted.
I just wrote down the things that were important, like how everything works, and I just left it at that.
You know what?
I'm never going to make this interesting unless I'm a boy who does crude humor a lot in their papers.
You know what? This is the thing. Sometimes we have to write about things. Sometimes we have to write about things that don't particularly please us. At some time, if you guys go on and you go to college, I guarantee someday you will have to write about something that doesn't thrill you. So this is also a skill, right? And if you don't find it interesting, at least decide something is important, right? So this is a good strategy. We are going to practice this again for next week. I have a new handout for you. Let's just go ahead and do that first. Could you guys, some of you have paper, some of you have blank spots in your reading guide, get out an empty piece of paper for me. Oh, whoa. We didn't do our prayer. Let's start with that. So sorry. Christ my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit, shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work. For to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person, for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. All right. Do not want to forget that. All right. I have a new source for you. I am not going to make you go to the library and find books. And this time it is called The Greeks and Their Neighbors. So actually, while I pass these out, why don't you guys make a new outline on your paper? 2 paragraphs again. I'm going to leave a little space in case I want some more, and then I'll write clincher. Ladies at the table over there, can you see okay, all of you? All right. And then we have 1, 2, 3. Because remember, we'd like to get at least 4 interesting or important things. We could get up 6 or 7 if we want to. 4 to 7 is what we're shooting for. So we'll give ourselves some space. But if we just don't find it particularly important or interesting, we'll just give up on that. And I will give you our source while you do that. That was a big sneeze. It's that time of year. Okay, you can take one and pass it down. You can take one and pass it down. And you also can take one and pass it down. All right. So obviously our overall, are you with me? Because I'm just going to say, like, I'm not above moving people around if I have to, so I want us to have a good time. But if we're being distracted, then it's not a good time anymore. So obviously we're going to write about some neighbors of the Greeks. It's painfully obvious. And what sort of topic options do you think we have? Take a look at your source. Do you see groupings of topics anywhere? And can you give me one of them? The Egyptians. Give me another one. The Lydians, the Assyrians, the Etruscans, the Phoenicians, the Scythians. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Scythians later after we get our paper done. And I guarantee, especially for the gentlemen, you will love what I have to say about Scythians. Anyway, so question number 2. How many of these am I going to choose if I want to do 2 paragraphs? 2. Okay, that's easy. So question number 3. Are there some of these that seem like they would be better choices than others? Which ones and why?
The ones that are closer to Greece.
Okay, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe the ones who are closer to Greece. Of course, to know that, we're going to have to consult the map. So we could base it on that. Is there any other basis on which you might choose to? What do you think, Evelyn? More information. Grace and Claire, were you going to say that too? I lean towards the more information they give me, the greater chance I have of finding something interesting or important, or at least 4 things that are interesting and important. Does that make sense? So take a look at the Lydians on the back. I feel like the Lydians, they might be very interesting. Actually, King Croesus was the king of Lydia, but I don't see a whole lot of stuff here. That seems like, So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick one together and do it. Then you're going to pick another one, and do it at home and then write 2 paragraphs. All right? So I suppose I could make an executive decision. You know what? We're going to do the Phoenicians. Oh, don't poo-poo the Phoenicians. Why are we poo-pooing the Phoenicians? They're actually, I chose them because they are actually pretty important.
I was literally going to pick this one.
Oh, I'm so glad. So for our topic, I am just going to call it the Phoenicians. I don't really need, boy, they have a really lot of vowels. Phoenicians. Like vowels, like they spilled a Scrabble board or something and just picked a lot of vowels out and decided to put them all in their name. Before we look to see if there's anything interesting or important, or at least 4 things, why don't we take a look at where these people live? Here's our map of the Mediterranean again. The Phoenicians live here. It says Syria and Palestine here. This is where Israel is. The Phoenicians, Tyre. Does everybody see Tyre?
Yeah.
Right there, my finger's there. That's one of the biggest Phoenician cities. And so we're going to find out about the Phoenicians in a minute, so I won't tell you a bunch about them. But the Phoenicians come in the Bible a lot, in the Old Testament. Does anybody remember the terrible queen of Israel, Jezebel? Ahab and Jezebel, they were big-time rotters. I mean, just big time. Ahab famously wanted some guy's vineyard, a guy named Naboth. And Jezebel's like, yeah, just kill him. Just kill him and take it. That's kind of rules of art. Anyway, Jezebel was Phoenician. It says her dad was a priest of the Phoenician god Baal. And we run into Baal a lot, Baal worship, and we have Elijah on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, Phoenicia. So we run into them a lot when we read the Old Testament. So that's one good reason to learn about them. But let's take a look. Let's read a sentence or a section at a time and decide if it's interesting or important. Okay, here we go. During the Greek Dark Ages, the most successful traders in the Mediterranean were a people called the Phoenicians. Is anything there interesting or important? What does it say they were the best at? Trading. So it says they were the most successful traders in the Mediterranean. Like they're the top notch. Do you know what they mean by traders? Not traitors. Yeah. Traitors hand over your country to the enemy and sell out their friends. Not traitors. Traders. What do traders do? Yeah, Luke.
Like, hey, man, please broccoli for fish.
That'd be fishermen, right? What are traders?
Buy stuff and take it and sell it.
Yeah, so you buy, either you make stuff that people really, really want, and you take it other places and sell it, or you buy something from someone cheap, because where they live, there's a lot of it, but then you take it somewhere else where there's not very much of it, and the people there will pay you a lot of money. So, for example, when I lived in Alaska, this isn't really a trader thing, but this is an expense thing. There was seafood all over the place, right? Because fishermen live in Alaska. And so there were just carts. You know how here you can get corn by the side of the road? You could get fish and crabs by the side of the road in Alaska, you know, and lobsters and stuff. And so like my dad would just stop by one of those carts and get a crab and bring it home. But here, it's really expensive, right? But there's a lot of it. So if I wanted to make some money, I might go collect the fish and the crabs. Of course, I have to pack them in ice. This is a harder thing. And then I might travel to Illinois where there aren't very many, and then people will pay me a lot of money. This is what the Phoenicians did. They did make something that was especially prized, so we'll find out about that in a minute. So how could we put that? What do you think we should put? We want to communicate that they're the most prominent traders in the Mediterranean, or they're the top traders. Successful traders. How about, could we put something with that, a little word that means they're the top, they're
Best.
the best. Well, I liked successful.
The best.
Well, best successful traders. What? Most successful traders. That's what I was fishing for. Most successful traders. And maybe some of them were traitors. Okay. They lived on the coast in what is now the Lebanon. Do we care that that's now Lebanon today?
No.
Okay, that's kind of boring. The Greeks called them phoenikes, or purple men, after a purple dye which they produced. There's kind of two things there. They make purple dye, and the Greeks call them purple men. There's two items. Do you like either of those or both? You like the purple men part? Who doesn't like being called purple men? I feel like if we say that, we ought to say the other one too. Do you know what I mean? Because that would just be a little random to just say the Greeks call them purple men. And are they purple? Do they dye their hair purple? Why are they purple men? So which thing should we put down first? Should we put they make purple dye or they call them purple men? Okay, and you know what? How convenient. How many words are there in make purple dye?
Oh my gosh.
Oh boy. We did it and we didn't even know we were doing it. Make purple dye. Or made purple dye. There are no Phoenicians there currently, to the best of my knowledge, making purple dye. Hey guys, dye is spelled like this.
Yes.
Not like
I think
they did not die, although I do not know if they did. So actually, I'm going to just give you a little aside here because this is probably intriguing you, and maybe you know about this. They make the purple dye out of a snail.
Oh yeah.
They dive off the coast, and they have special swimmers who can really hold their breath for a super long time. And they dive down and they collect these snails, and then they boil them in a pot, and apparently it reeks. Because ancient sources tell us it's a stinky place to be. And then they strain out the snail bits and everything. And then you put cloth in it, and it dyed it the most beautiful, deep, like almost a burgundy purple. And does anybody know what purple clothes were associated with in the ancient world? Amelia? Royalty or riches. For a while, in some places, only royalty could wear the purple. And then in Rome, later on, Roman citizens were allowed to have a purple stripe on their togas, but slaves couldn't, and non-citizens couldn't. So purple dye, I mean, it sounds kind of random, like, purple dye, big deal. But in the ancient world, people paid boatloads for the purple dye or the cloth that was dyed purple. And in the book of Acts, Paul is traveling around and he meets in Philippi, I believe, a lady named Lydia, and it says she's a dealer in purple cloth. So she was from Asia, and for them that meant where Israel is now, and Turkey and that. And she was a dealer in purple cloth. They were still doing it in Jesus' time. So she was probably pretty well off. Yeah. Lydia was not a poor lady living in Philippi. So when she started following Jesus, that probably caused quite a stir because she was up there. She was powerful. Okay. So they make purple dye. So the Greeks call them purple men. So here's my problem. Purple men, are those two important words? We need to include purple men. So we only get one other words. Greeks call purple men. But
Can we just put called purple men?
called purple men. And we could just not worry about who called them that. There are people that called them, or we might remember that all of these are neighbors of the Greeks, right? So We'll have to take a chance. But I like Emma's suggestion. We'll just have to, if we don't remember the Greeks called them, sure, called purple men. All right. Their most important exports were purple cloth, timber, glass, and goods made of metal and wood, including fine furniture inlaid with ivory. Do we care about any of that? Do we like any of that?
I mean, you already named the purple cloth.
Okay, some people are digging the furniture.
I know what the trade part.
Okay. Okay. Brittany wants to put it in. I'm going to put it in as an optional. So did we know what it means to export?
Yeah, like send it out of
Yeah, send it. X means out, like exit. The exit takes you out. And porto means carry in Latin. Like if something's portable or a porta potty. Oh, Christian, when you guys were little and you did my little Latin class, do you remember we talked about porta potties? Okay, that was always the greatest moment of that class. So export means to carry it out. Import means to carry it in. So they export. What do they export? What are two things they export that we are interested in? Cloth and furniture. Sure. You know what? We don't have to name the individual pieces of furniture. That's cool. We can just lump it together as furniture. Gosh, we got our 4. I'm going to just read the last little bit because you never know, there might be just some plum piece of information there that we really want to include. The Phoenicians lived in independent city-states, each of which had its own king. Okay. How can we say that each city had its own king? With 3 words.
City king.
Each city king. I like it. I'm going to put those 5. These are all going to be optional. You know, just we'll put them down if somebody wants to. But if you don't like it, just skip it. They were daring sailors and explorers and established colonies around the south and west shores of the Mediterranean. Do we like the fact that they're great sailors? Oh, I am so sorry. Their most important cities were Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre. Okay. They were daring sailors and explorers and established colonies around the south and west shores of the Mediterranean. Okay. And established colonies. Could we just add one more word? Because we got 3. How about we say they're sailors who established colonies? Sailors established colonies. We're going to learn about one of their colonies, which is exceedingly famous, next spring. In about 1000 BC, the Phoenicians invented a form of writing. Their alphabet was later adopted by the Greeks. All right, we're tired of writing, right? We got enough here. Actually, I wish I had brought this in. It says, see page 17, and it just so happens that I brought the book that this came out of. Oh, and it's not here. On my computer, I have the Phoenician alphabet. Maybe I should print that out and bring it to you guys next week. The Greek letters come from Phoenicia. Writing, as far as we know, in Greece came from Phoenicia. So it turns out it is kind of important-ish, but... And the Romans took the Greek. And then we took the Roman. Europe took the Roman. Okay, so this looks like plenty of stuff for a paragraph. So here's what you guys are going to do. You're going to choose another neighbor of the Greeks, but probably not the Lydians, because they just don't say enough about it. I don't care which one you pick. And frankly, if you pick one and you start to read it and it leaves you very cold, you can just cross it out and pick another one, you know what I mean? Get at least 4, and then let's just review how to write it. Remember, our first sentence is the topic sentence, so it's going to say something about the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were neighbors of the Greeks. Great. The Phoenicians were a famous people of the ancient world, whatever. Somehow you're going to tell me this paragraph's about the Phoenicians. And then I'm going to write my stuff. And then at the end, I'm going to have a clincher that says, so you can see how important the Phoenicians were in the ancient world. I'm going to mention the Phoenicians one more time. Then you're going to do the same thing with a second neighbor. So I'm going to say the Lydians because we're not doing the Lydians. The Lydians were apparently pretty minor because there wasn't very much information on my sheet about them. Don't write that. Yes. And then at the clincher, I'd say, so this would have been a better paragraph if I had known more about the Lydians. That's very bad examples, but do you see, in the topic sentence, I mention the topic. In the clincher, I mention the topic again. And I am looking for that topic clincher. I am looking for a simile. I am looking for alliteration again. Tell me again, somebody, what alliteration is. You just did it in your paper. Yes, Emma.
3 words in the same sentence that start with the same sound.
Just like you just did, right? Yes. Every time we define it, we end up saying it. And so, yes, I'm looking for simile, and I'm looking for alliteration, and I'm looking for a topic sentence and a clincher and 2 paragraphs. Does anybody have any questions? It's exactly what we did last week. And by the way, and so those of you, it's not wrong if you did this, but if you put it on 2 different pieces of paper or whatever, no need, it's one paper, right? So you just indent and you write your paragraph, then you go to the next line and indent and write your next paragraph just in a row. But it's not, it's not wrong if you don't do that, but they go together. They go together, they're not 2 separate things. Okay, any questions at all? We good? Awesome.
Is there anything that you suggest to use any one of these
No. I mean, here's the thing, guys. Honestly, this wouldn't work if it was a whole book, but it's a paper. So what you could do, Bryn, you could just take 10 minutes to read them all and then pick the one you like the sound of best. We don't always have that luxury, because if you get a book from the library or something like that, you can't read the whole book to decide if you like it. But in this case, I can't imagine it would take anybody more than 10 or 15 minutes to read everything on this paper. And then you might say, ooh, they sound cool, I'm doing them. And you could choose that way. But no, I don't have a particular, or if there's, like if you're really into Egypt or something, pick something that you already like, if you want to. All right, let's take a look at the beginning of the Persian War. So last week, I gave you sort of a fill-in, right? I did about the colonies in Asia Minor, and I didn't really fill in the very rest of it because I noticed that your chapter for this week said, after the Ionian cities had been taken over, and like, you might have thought, what is going on there? So let me just recap. Yes. Oh, you ended up reading the whole chapter? So if you did, that's great. If you didn't, remember the Greeks were running out of room and food. And so, as far as we know, that's their purpose, their reason. They started sending colonies out, and one place they sent a lot of colonies to is over here. This is Turkey today. And they called it Asia, or Asia Minor. And so Sardis and Miletus, these were famous Greek cities. And then along came Croesus, king of Lydia. And he's the guy that Solon visited. You remember I told you that story, and Solon said, well, you never know if you're blessed or fortunate or happy until the end of your life. And then it so happened that Croesus decided to attack the Persians, not very wisely, and he got beaten. And that's where we kind of start this week's chapter. The king of Persia found out that a bunch of Greeks, particularly the Athenians, had helped these guys rebel against him. They said, we don't want to be ruled by Persia. We didn't like being ruled by the Lydians, and we so don't want to be ruled by Persia. By the way, Persia, at this point, the Persians owned pretty much everything. And, to put this in perspective for you, the kingdom before the Persians that owned just about everything were the Babylonians. And you guys know a good lot about the Babylonians because this is where Daniel is, in the book of Daniel. The Babylonians, here. The Babylonians lived way over here, right? Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they had taken over, ignore the colors on this map, this is the Roman Empire, this is from later, just ignore the colors. The Babylonians ruled over here, they came over to Israel, they took Jerusalem, they took Daniel and his friends away, and they were in charge until the Medes and the Persians, I don't think the Medes are on there, started rising up and taking over. And do you remember, this is one of my favorite stories when I was a little girl out of the Bible. One night, the king of the Babylonians decided to have a party. And he decided to really live it up. They were being besieged by the Persians. The Persians were attacking Babylon. But they're like, you know what? I care this for the Persians because I live in this awesomely fortified, city. They're never getting in here. And so the king of Babylon decided to have a big old shindig party. And he decided to use the dishes that they took out of the temple in Jerusalem for his drinking party. The holy cups and dishes that were for God. And he's living it up, and they're swilling their drinks from the dishes, and suddenly a hand appeared. No body, just a hand. And it wrote on the wall something, I don't know how to pronounce, many tekel uparsin. And it was a language he didn't know. And so he's like, I don't know what that means, but that is never a good thing when hands just appear and write on your walls. Generally, that would not be a good thing. So he calls the wise men, and Daniel is there. And he calls Daniel in. He says, Daniel, what does this mean? And he says, it says, you have been weighed in the scales and found wanting. And your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And it says that it was not good news, but he rewarded Daniel because, well, Daniel did what he asked him to do. He told him what it meant. And that very night, the Persians took Babylon. It tells us in the Bible. And from other historians, I brought this guy, Herodotus. As you can see, he wrote kind of a really long history of all the things we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. And he said, Cyrus, the king of Persia, there was a river that flowed through Babylon, and it flowed under the walls, and they had gates. He diverted the river. He dug a channel upstream, and he diverted the river so it would dry up, and the riverbed was dry, and they could creep under. And they got into the city. And that night, the Persians took the city, just like the writing on the wall. Cyrus turned out to be a really good guy for the Israelites because he told them they could go back and rebuild Jerusalem. And the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament talk about that, how they went back and they read the book of the law again and they mourned for their sins and they worked on rebuilding the temple. Cyrus, the king of Persia, is the one that let them do that. But for other people, Cyrus wasn't all that great, including these people in Lydia. these colonies because they felt like he was an oppressor, and they just rebelled. They just rebelled. And this is where our chapter picks up, today's chapter. So let me find our questions. I can just set it on the floor and look down. Okay. What, and this I've already kind of given you the answer here. What did the Athenians do to earn the hatred and anger of Darius, king of Persia? What did they do? And I just mentioned it. They helped the Lydians rebel. They helped the Lydians rebel. And I'm wearing this thing today, but I think it's my glasses. And I keep reaching for it to put my glasses over my face. Just a second. I wanted to find something. But I don't think Dorothy Mills tells you this. She must tell you somewhere. Maybe it was in the previous chapter. When they helped them rebel, they accidentally set a fire and they burned down Miletus. And Miletus was kind of the most powerful city of the Greek colonies. And it really ticked the Persians off. It's like, they burnt down Miletus? They burned down Sardis? Are you kidding me? So he was very, very angry. So he decided to punish them. But first, Dorothy Mills tells us he took a detour to the Scythians. I promised you information about the Scythians. The Scythians live, boy, I wish I had somewhere to hang my, yeah. The Scythians lived like up here, up north of the Black Sea. And they were pretty wild. I'm going to read you some things about the Scythians in a minute, but this is the people that kept running away. Darius would chase them and they would run away. And they would chase them and they would run away. And finally he sends a message, says, dudes, what are you afraid? You just stop and fight. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. We don't really have cities because we're nomads. We just kind of live out in the fields with our flocks. So why would we stop and fight? We don't have anything to defend. We just grab our animals and we keep moving. But you, on the other hand, you seem to have a lot to lose, King of Persia, and maybe you want to stop chasing us. And they sent him a bird, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. At first, the Persian could not imagine what these gifts might mean. But one of his wise men interpreted them as meaning, unless you become birds and fly up to heaven, or become mice and sink down under the earth, or become frogs and leap into the lakes, you will not return home, but you will be smitten by these arrows. Okay. But does he stop following them? No. No, he keeps chasing them. So our historian here tells us some interesting things about the Scythians. And this is always a crowd pleaser. So stop for a moment and tell you what he tells us about the Scythians. He says, first of all, the Scythian soldier drinks the blood of the first man he overthrows in battle. Nice. Whatever number he slays, he cuts off all their heads and carries them to the king. In order to strip the skull of its covering, I won't read that because it's a very detailed description of ripping all the skin off a skull. The Scyth is proud of these scalps and hangs them from his bridle rein. He uses them as a napkin. Others flay the right arms of their dead enemies and make of the skin a covering for their quivers. Wow. The skulls of their enemies, not indeed of all, but of those they most detest, they treat as follows. Having sawn off the portion below the eyebrows and cleaned the inside, they cover the outside with leather. When a man is poor, this is all he does, but if he's rich, he lines the inside with gold. In either case, the skull is used as a drinking cup. Wow, I don't think I'd want to be chasing these guys somehow, but that's the Scythians. But this is the most popular. Okay. My son, every time I teach this, in honor of my son, I tell this story. He dubbed this thing I'm about to describe the merry-go-round of death. And this is how it is known to posterity now, the merry-go-round of death. When someone important dies, okay, like a king, it says they bury one of his concubines, like his harem girls, first killing her by strangling, and then his cupbearer, his cook, his groom, some of his horses, okay, and then they raise a mound. So sorry. After a year has gone by, further ceremonies take place. 50 of the best of the late king's attendants are taken and strangled, with 50 of the most beautiful horses. When they are dead, their bowels are taken out and the cavity cleaned, filled full of chaff, and straightway sewn up again. This done, a number of posts are driven into the ground, set in 2 pairs, and on every pair, half the felly of a wheel is placed, and then stakes are run lengthwise through the bodies of the horses, and they mount the horses on the posts. So see the merry-go-round? It's the merry-go-round of death. And then the dead servants, they mount on top of they stick a pole through them and they mount them on top of the horses. So you just go out there and there's this huge circle of dead mounted horses with dead guys sitting on top of them. It's the merry-go-round of death. This is the Scythians. So if you ever in the future are reading about the ancient world and you run into the Scythians, these dudes are tough. So Darius kept chasing them and chasing them and chasing them, and it might not surprise you to find out he never did manage to conquer them because they're rough. Although they doubled back behind them. He had built a bridge of boats across a river, and they doubled behind him, and the people guarding the bridge, they said, hey, do you like the Persians? Because I don't like the Persians. He's bossing you around. He wants to boss us around. Why don't you just break the bridge? Break the bridge and he won't be able to get home. And they'll just wander around and starve to death, or we'll pick them off one by one. And a couple of the guys guarding the bridge were like, this sounds like a pretty good idea. But one guy's like, no, we will stay loyal to the Persians. And they didn't do it. They probably should have done it. Were you going to ask a question, Bryn?
Did the Scythians, like the king, he would have to have a spot to stay. It sounded like he had a house.
I don't know. If he just had a really nice tent. As far as, if they had a capital city, Darius never found it. And they claimed they just, they had a capital cave. They had a capital tent that was movable, perhaps. All right, so the Persians came down on the rebellious Greek cities, and they came down hard. They destroyed Miletus. And I guess I kind of already blew up this question, but why did the capture and fall of Miletus upset the Greeks so severely? I already told you something about Miletus. That,
It was like the richest city.
yeah, it was.
And it was like the
Yeah, yeah. This was, there were, this is the time when there were some great thinkers and scientists, and a lot of them were from Miletus. So it was sort of a hub of, it was like a college town, right? But also really wealthy. It was awful. In fact, Dorothy Mills tells us that some poor guy made a play about the fall of Miletus, and the audience cried so much that they passed a law that he couldn't ever put that play on again. No one will ever see that play again. It's too depressing. It's banned. But so Darius took these cities back, but then he started asking people, why did you do that? Who helped you do this? Like the Athenians helped us. And it says, he inquired who the Athenians were. He never heard of Athens. Like, who are the Athenians? And how are they so puffed up that they come over here and help my cities to revolt? When he had been informed, he asked for his bow, and having received it, he placed an arrow on the string. He discharged it upwards towards heaven, and as he shot into the air, he said, "Zeus, that it may be granted me to take vengeance upon the Athenians." Having so said, he charged one of his attendants that when dinner was set before the king, he should always say 3 times, "Master, remember the Athenians." Every time he sits down to eat, there's a servant saying there, "Don't forget the Athenians. You need to go whoop up on the Athenians." So he puts a plan in motion to do so. But first, hey, if you can take a place without fighting, that's good, right? If they'll just surrender, saves everybody a lot of problem. So he sends messengers to Sparta. Well, he sends messengers to all the Greek cities, but in Sparta and Athens particularly. And they asked them for earth and water. And you might, why does he want earth and water? The idea is, I'm giving you our land, right? If I give you some dirt, if I give you some water from my land, then I've surrendered my land. I asked this, how did the Spartans and the Athenians respond to, will you give me earth and water? Yeah, Emma.
They refused, and they threw the messengers in the lake.
Threw them in a pit, threw them into a well, and said, hey, have some earth and water. Have fun with that. Which was also kind of nasty because you generally don't mistreat messengers. You know what I mean? It's sort of the code. They're like, chucked them in a well and said, there's your earth and water. So that was the answer. So Darius said, this is on. He, now remember, let's take a look at the map again, what he's got to do. He brings everybody to the coast, right? But they've got to get from here to Greece, and he's got a lot of soldiers. Most of them this time are going to sail across. It's not that far. But remember how people in the ancient world didn't like to just shoot across. They like to kind of go around. So he goes around, and he hits right up here, below my finger. Do you see it looks like a paw print, sort of? It's got 3 little thingies sticking down.
Really weird jellyfish.
Yeah, yeah. And the middle one, I think it's the middle one, has some mountains at the end of it. It's called Mount Athos. And today there are monasteries. It is all a bunch of caves with various Orthodox monasteries are at Athos. But not then. It was just this mountain. Well, problem around Athos is stormy. Bad currents and stormy. A bunch of his fleet got wrecked at Mount Athos, which wasn't a very good way to begin things. Not to mention that when he was trying to cross with some of his foot soldiers, this the Hellespont here, he made a bridge of boats, and then a storm flew up and wrecked his bridge. It is, and so that was irritating. Then Mount Athos, it says, number of ships destroyed was 300 and more than 20,000 men in the storms. Not good, but eventually he gets there. Do you remember last week, I think it was last week, that I told you there was a guy named Pisistratus, and he became tyrant of Athens? He dressed up some lady like Athena and brought her in a cart, right? And then I said he died and his sons took over, but one of his sons got assassinated, and the other one ran away, and I told you would find him again. It says, now Hippias, the exiled tyrant, had taken refuge with the Persians. He ran off to Persia, and he was helping the Persians. Okay. So he's telling them where's a good place to land. He's telling them that's a traitor. Thank you. He's not a traitor. He's a traitor. And so under Hippias's direction, they sail up, and they're looking for a good place to land, and they decide, right up here, they're going to sail up into this little inlet, and right up here is a really good place. It's kind of sheltered from storms. They can unload their ships, and Athens is pretty close by, and they can go beat up the Athenians and then head to Sparta. The town nearest this place was called Marathon. This was the plain of Marathon. And the Athenians found out that the Persians were sailing in, and they panicked. Athens is not a big city. They estimate, the number of Athenian male citizens, maybe 6,000, right? I think for this, they got 9,000 guys together to go fight from Athens. This is not a very big army, right? And they're fighting against the most powerful army in the world, the Persians. They've taken Babylon. They didn't take the Scythians, but they tried. They've taken, they've gone to Egypt. They've taken over the known world, and they are right, like, next door with boats. And the Athenians are, oh my gosh. So, guys, if you gotta fight a battle, who are you gonna call in ancient Greece? In ancient Greece, you're gonna call, who are the awesome fighters? Spartans. Holy cow, we need some Spartans. We need them now. We need them now. So they sent a guy, and I'm gonna end up blowing up who was Phidippides, because it's just more fun to tell the story. They sent a guy named Phidippides. He was a professional runner, right? So he's really good runner. He's really fast. He made it to Sparta in like less than 48 hours. He didn't sleep. He just ran all the way to Sparta. And he comes in and he says, okay, the Persians are here. You guys got to grab your weapons and come. They are taking over Greece. And the Spartans say, well, here's the thing. We're having a festival for the new moon, and we can't really go fight until the festival's over. But we promise you when the festival's over, we'll come help you. This is not helpful. So poor Phidippides, he needs to get the message back that they're not coming. So he runs all the way back to Athens. He's like, okay, no Spartans until I don't know when, like not for a few days. Great. They're like, well, I guess we're just going to have to go do it ourselves. So they march their guys out to Marathon, north of the city, and then they see this army coming. Oh, who's that? Who's that? Oh, this little tiny town called Plataea. They sent 1,000 guys. I love the Plataeans. That was so good of them. Like 1,000 guys wasn't really going to make a ton of difference, but it was nice of them. So the Persians start unloading horses and men, and the Greeks just rushed them. And this is not, what I'm about to say does not do this credit. 10,000 Greeks fought off and beat the biggest army in the world, the most powerful army in the world. It's just, what? That's what the king of Persia said. What just happened? They couldn't believe it. Now, historians are all over this. Like, how did this happen? What did they do? A lot of people say, well, you know what beaches are like. If it's sandy, it's very slippery, right? You know how, if you've ever been to the ocean, you know when the wave comes in and it goes back out and it kind of takes the sand out from under your feet a little bit. Or it could be marshy or rocky, but it's hard to keep your balance when waves are lapping your legs. So they're unloading horses and stuff. Were they distracted? Were they unbalanced? A lot of historians think they just whacked them before they could get their horses out and ready and their battle lines ready, right? However it happened, those guys beat off the entire Persian army. So bad that they left. Well, they got back on their ships and they were going to try to sail around and get to Athens first. But the Greeks knew what they were going to do and they hightailed it back to Athens. And they closed the gates and they were ready and waiting for them. And the Persians took one look at it and said, yeah, we're done. We lost ships in the storm. Like, this is not going well. Poor Phidippides. He runs back to Athens, right? Okay, Spartans aren't coming. But hey, I want to go fight too. Great, Pheidippides, come on. So he fights at Marathon. Then they say, hey, Pheidippides, you want to go tell Athens we won? But tell them, hunker down and get ready because I think the Persians are going to sail around and try to hit Athens. He runs back. This poor guy in 3 days has run I don't know how many miles. And the story, the legend of Pheidippides is he runs into Athens and he can just kind of croak out, it's victory, victory for the Athenians, and then he just drops dead from exhaustion because he's done all this running. All the ancient sources tell this story. I have no reason to believe it's not true. People can do amazing feats of running, you know what I mean? And so even today. So that is Pheidippides. So the interesting thing is, it is a little over 24 miles from Athens to Marathon. And Pheidippides ran it. And in his honor, we now have given that race the title of a marathon. That is what a marathon is, although today it is 26 miles. And the reason is because it is my understanding that at the first Olympic Games, when they started them again in the modern times, in 1896, they wanted to have a marathon in honor of Pheidippides, but they wanted it to start and end at a certain place, like in front of the judges and in front of the spectators. So they tweaked the distance a little bit and they made it 26 miles. But even though it's not exactly the same amount of miles as it, from Marathon to Athens, it's still why it's called that. The Battle of Marathon, every time you hear about any marathon anywhere, think of poor Pheidippides, and his marathon, his first and last marathon. Because that's why it's called that. So this Battle of Marathon, if you're going to learn, actually, let's put it on our timelines. Because I was going to say, if you're going to learn any dates, this is a really good one to learn. Everybody turn to your timeline that's on page 72. I don't think we have anything on there yet. And we're putting on there 490 BC. So the top is 500 and the bottom is 1. Where on that line do you think you should put 490?
Very close.
Very close to what? Very close to the 500. So up near the top. 490, Battle of Marathon. They left the bodies. They estimate that only 200 Athenians died. What does Dorothy Mills say to this? The Athenians lost about 200 men. I do not see where she tells us how many they estimate the Persians lost. But obviously, 6,000. The Persians lost 6,000. The Athenians lost 200. This is just one of the most...
They also jumped on their ships as fast as
Yes, yes. So this is just one of the most amazing battles in the history of the world. So I asked you, why is it so significant in history? Did anybody write down an answer for that last question? Dorothy Mills told you something at the end of the chapter. Why did she say this was a big deal? Yeah, Evelyn. Yeah, they were basically the first ones who stood up to them. But there's another thing too. Okay, one more time with this big map. We have 3 continents on this map, right? This part is Europe. At the bottom, we see Africa. And over here is Asia. And Asia is usually marked by like a line here and by, like the Persian Gulf. Like everything on this side is Africa, everything on this side is Asia, everything on this side is Europe, everything on this side is Asia. Asia attacked Europe for the first time, and Europe wins. It sort of set the stage for the fact that Europe is going to be a big mover and shaker in history of the world, and not Asia so much, because Babylon was in Asia, and the Persians are in Asia, and the Assyrians are in Asia, and all these famous peoples of the ancient world. But You're up 1. Now, you would be very silly to think that Darius is just going to go home and say, well, shucks, we tried, but doggone it, it didn't quite work out. Of course he's not going to. He's still got the guy saying, remember the Athenians, and now he's got something else to remember them for. How dare they? How dare they? I gotta go back and show them who's boss. That is what you're gonna read about next time. Going back and showing them who's boss. So for next week, I would like you to read, where's the paper? Hang on. I don't. All right, give me just a moment, guys. I'm not sure why I can't find. I wonder if I put it away. Oh, and I did. I want you to read, in your book it says chapter 9, parts 1 and 2. Actually, I did not write down here what it's called. It's called The Great Persian Invasion. You don't have to write this down if your page numbers or your chapters are the same as mine, just if they're not, under Xerxes. And we're reading part 1 and 2 because it's a pretty long chapter. So we're not going to read the whole thing. So it's got a 1, the preparations, and then a 2, Thermopylae. So read parts 1 and 2 of the chapter called The Great Persian Invasion under Xerxes, or it's chapter 9 if your chapters are like mine. And we will find out the second part of the story. And if you can decide if you think that when they come back again, the Persians are going to win this time. I will not tell you. You have to read it. Yes. Did you have a question, Ann? Okay. Okay. So that said, are there any questions about that? Okay. So you're going to write about the Greeks and their neighbors. And you're going to read parts 1 and 2 of the Great Persian Invasion under Xerxes. And we're also going to move along in our Trojan War book that I'd like to spend the rest of our time talking about. If I can find it. Oh. And while I'm here, I will grab my poems. I only have one for today. There actually is a poem about Herodotus that wrote about the Scythians, but I did it again. It's not very interesting. But we have the Battle of Marathon. We have soldiers. The Athenians and the Persians could never get along. Each accused the other of doing something wrong. Their armies met at Marathon, a flat and grassy plain. Any hopes they had for peace were totally in vain. Athens won the battle, but how to send the news? Back then there was no CNN with handy TV crews. Athens was 26 miles away. I'll get there, a brave soldier cried. He ran all the way without making a stop, told the people, then fell down and died. Today it's a race with a blistering pace, with runners from Maine to Seattle. The marathon run, hardest under the sun, is named for this ancient Greek battle. By the way, I was getting ready to tell you, they left the bodies, the dead Greeks there at Marathon, and they just buried them together in a big burial mound. Like they just dug a pit and they laid them all out in the pit and had kind of services, what we would call, religious services over it. And Amelia, could you not, I keep looking at it and thinking about it and then not being able to think. So they built this mound and everything. They were building the mound. A couple days later, after the battle, here come the Spartans. Hey, how's it going? I'm like, well, it would have been going a lot better if you guys had been here. And so the Spartans, they say, came and just took a look. It's like, oh, yeah, that's a lot of dead Persians. And then they left. That wasn't very helpful. I guess I don't want them to do things against their religion, but really, I felt like they could have come. So that is
Maybe they could have just stayed.
maybe. Today, unfortunately, when I was in Greece, oh, I wanted to go to Marathon, but it would have been a long bus trip out of our way that day, so I didn't get to go. And people said, though, there's not much to see, but I thought it would have been cool. The mound is still there. There's a big artificial hill. It's the burial mound of the guys who died at Marathon. And I think that would be really cool to see, but I did not get to see it. But sometimes in picture books, they'll show you the mound at Marathon. They're still there in honor of the amazing thing they did to preserve Greece. Okay. The Trojan War. Why are these people fighting? What happened to make them start fighting?
Well, basically a golden apple.
Okay, yes. It kind of depends on where we start the story, doesn't it? In Anne's version, I mean, Paris is a wife stealer, is what he is. He's a terrible guest. Do you remember we talked about the fact that being a good host and a good guest is sort of important to the Greeks? So the Cyclops, is a bad host because he eats people. Paris is a bad guest. When you steal some guy's wife and also a bunch of his stuff and run off with it, it's not cool. Now, but back to what happened before. Why did Paris think he could go steal? Well, first of all, why her? What was her name and why her?
Helen.
Helen. Why Helen? Why not some other lady?
Aphrodite promised him.
Yeah, promised him what?
Girl.
The most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. Helen, actually, her dad was Zeus. And she has brothers named Castor and Pollux. The Romans call them Castor and Pollux, who are gods, demigods. Like Helen is way up there. She's sort of partially divine. She's really, really beautiful. And yeah, so Aphrodite promised Paris, you can have the most beautiful woman in the world. In return for what? What did Aphrodite want from Paris? Golden apple. So where did this golden apple come from?
The goddess of evil or
Yeah, discord, Eris. It's like the goddess of arguing and being angry with people. Not surprisingly, there was a wedding and she didn't get invited because nobody wants the goddess of arguing at their wedding.
she was mad.
And she was mad. She was mad. Who was getting married? Do you remember? That's okay. A guy named Peleus was getting married to an ocean nymph, a minor goddess named Thetis. Thetis was, I suppose all water goddesses are good looking. I really don't know. I haven't met very many. I assume so. Thetis was, and Zeus kind of took a liking to her, because that's what Zeus does. And unfortunately, though, he got a message that that the child of Thetis would be stronger than his father. Well, Zeus doesn't want somebody stronger than him running around, He's like, okay, nix on the whole thing with Thetis. I do not want to have a child with Thetis. So I'm going to marry her off to some mortal guy. And then it's not any great harm if her son is more powerful than his dad, because his dad's just some mortal. It was a plan. So, all right, congratulations, Thetis. You are marrying Peleus whether you like it or not. So they have a wedding. They don't invite the goddess of discord, but she comes anyway. And takes this golden apple and just rolls it out into the midst of the crowd. And on the apple, it says, "For the fairest." Oh, man. And now immediately, Hera and Artemis and Aphrodite start arguing over it. Oh, I'm not Athena. Sorry. So sorry. Yes, you're right. Hera and Athena and Aphrodite. It's mine. No, it's mine. No, it's mine. No, it's mine. Are you kidding? This goes on for years. Yes, so many years that the son of Peleus and Thetis, like they have a son and he grows up. He's a teenager. He's a teenager by the time this gets resolved. Their son is Achilles, the great warrior Achilles. And so finally, like, it's enough. It's enough. We got to have a judge. Who can we pick to be a judge? Why did they pick Paris? What's his deal? Yeah, he was kind of living out with some wood nymph. He is a shepherd. But who was he really?
He's the son of a king.
He's a son of a king. He's a prince. He's a prince of Troy. Why is he living out as a shepherd in the middle of nowhere with some wood nymph lady? They threw him out when he was a baby. This is always a good conjecture. Like, how did someone end up out in the woods? 19 times out of 20, because their parents threw him out. Why would they throw out their son? That's so mean. What did he do? That would be, I'm not sure if that would be less or more mean than what actually happened. No, he was fine. He was completely normal. But his mom got a prophecy. She had a dream, actually, that she was going to give birth to a flaming torch that would burn down Troy. When she was pregnant with him. It's like, oh, our son is going to bring destruction on Troy. Let's throw him out. But as always happens, somebody found him. He didn't die. So he's living out there, and apparently eventually he finds out who he is. I don't know if it's when the goddesses come to him, but he's out there living this very solitary life. He seems okay. So the three goddesses say, hey, Paris, which one of us is the fairest? Which one gets the golden apple? We've been fighting over this for a good 15 years now. It's time to put it to rest. And of course, they don't play fair. The goddesses don't play fair, do they? So Hera comes and says, hey, Paris, come here. If you give it to me, I'm the queen. I'm the queen of the gods. I'll make you a great ruler. I'll make you a great earthly king. Like, all right. And then Athena's like, come over here. I'm the goddess of wisdom. I can give you just tons of wisdom. You can be the wisest man in the world. Paris is like, all right. And then Aphrodite's, come over here. How would you like the most beautiful woman in the world? He's like, done. I will take that deal. And everything goes from there. So, yeah, eventually he goes back to Troy, and his parents are so sorry they threw him out when he was a baby. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe he's not so bad after all. Let's just bring him back. And hey, Paris, would you like to go on a little sightseeing trip and go see the world? Would you like to go to Greece? Where he finds Helen and snatches her and takes her back to Troy. And the Greeks are not happy. So here's another bit of the story that you have to know. Helen's husband, obviously he was the most unhappy of everybody, you would think. His name's Menelaus. Menelaus is the king of Sparta. But his brother, Agamemnon, is king in Mycenae. And he's like the big king. Every city has its own king, but he's the head king over all the kings. Now, back when Helen was young, she was pretty then too. And everybody wanted to marry her, you know. And they all came knocking on her dad's door. Her dad's named Tyndareus. He's like, I want to marry your daughter. He's like, I know, everybody wants to marry my daughter. So here's the deal. He tells all this crowd of guys. When she picks a guy, or when I pick a guy, all the rest of you You better treat the guy that gets chosen good. You better not persecute the guy just because you wanted her. Whoever her chosen husband is, if he ever has a need, if he's ever in distress or has a problem, you got to come help him. You got to promise to come help him. And they're like, we promise. It's called the Oath of Tyndareus. They all promise. We will help. Well, Menelaus' wife just got stolen. So what has to happen? Everybody has to come help him, right? Because they promised. Plus his big brother Agamemnon is super duper powerful. So let's all gather. They go around. They're going to gather all the great warriors of Greece. So they go to Ithaca, the island of Ithaca. Like, Odysseus, come fight with us. How did Odysseus feel about that? Was he just like, yeah, let's go fight? What did he do? What did he do? Do you remember?
He didn't want to fight.
Yeah, see, he acted like he was crazy. Odysseus is pretty super duper smart. This is kind of what he's known for, you know. He's like, if I pretend to be insane, they don't want insane people in the army. So he just started plowing the beach and sowing like salt, like he was planting fields. And then he said, oh, got to get it done, got to get it done. And like, oh, poor Odysseus, he's totally lost it. He lived up on the island up here, Ithaca, this side of Greece. Pandarius, Palamon, I'm sorry, I know his name starts with a P and it's escaping me. He said, oh, no, I know how to prove he's not crazy. Does anybody remember what they did to prove he wasn't crazy?
They threw his son on the ground.
Yeah, so he'd be in the way. Yeah. They're like, let's see if he plows over his son. And of course, he didn't. He did. It's okay. It's not important. He plows around him and they're like, you're not nuts. It's like, okay, I'm not nuts. I'll go. So he leaves his wife Penelope and his baby son Telemachus on Ithaca, and they're like, okay, let's round up some more heroes. This sounds like a Marvel sort of movie, or like you got to go everywhere and pick up the heroes from wherever because you've got a quest. So now they're going to go to this island where Achilles is. Achilles' mother, Thetis, it was her wedding that started the whole thing. She knew something. The gods told her something unfortunate about her son. He's got a couple of choices here. He will either have a short life with great glory, or a long life in obscurity with no glory or fame or anything. And she was kind of afraid he might pick the first one. He might go for the whole glory thing. So she decided to hide him. She didn't really want him to go to Troy because, glory and death. And so she hid him on this island with a king who had a bunch of daughters, and they dressed him up as a girl. So no one would be able to tell Achilles was there. Well, Odysseus, as I told you, he's pretty super smart. And he says, I got a plan. So he dresses up as a trader, not a traitor, and takes a bunch of jewelry and stuff, like he's selling jewelry, and a sword. And he lays out his blanket, and is like putting out all the necklaces and the earrings and the bracelets and stuff, and a sword. And all the princesses like, oh, look at the necklaces, look at the bracelets. But one of them says, this sword is awesome. And he's like, oh, don't you want a necklace? No, I want the sword. And finally Odysseus is like, you're Achilles, aren't you? He's like, yeah, I'm Achilles. So they recruit Achilles. They do all the recruiting, and they get to the beach. They've got all their ships, 1,000 ships full of soldiers. But, doggone it, the wind is not blowing for them. And they want to row all the way to Troy. Where is Troy, by the way? It is up here. Does everybody see Troy? And they're all congregating at Aulis. I think like here, somewhere along this coast, okay? Aulis, but I don't remember where it is. So this problem, we need wind. We need wind to fill our sails and sail us all over there. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? So they call the soothsayer Calchas. Does anybody remember what he said to do? What are they going to need to do to get wind? kill your daughter, Agamemnon. You're going to have to sacrifice your daughter to Artemis. Okay. Her name's Iphigenia. So, there are multiple versions of this. I don't remember which one is in that book, but the most prominent one is, how is he going to get his daughter there? I mean, you can't just send home and say, hey, will you come to camp so we can sacrifice you? And her mom's not going to like that either. By the way, Agamemnon's wife is Helen's sister. Agamemnon and Menelaus are two brothers who are married to two sisters, Clytemnestra and Helen. So Clytemnestra, she's not going to go for that. So he does this. He says, oh, why don't you bring Iphigenia? Because I think we're going to marry her to Achilles. I think she and Achilles are just going to get married before. And she's like, awesome, because Achilles is great. And she brings her, and then they nab her and sacrifice her. Do not forget this, because Clytemnestra will not forget this. You will want to remember that this happened, because Clytemnestra is never going to forget that this happened. It is not cool that her husband killed their daughter. But they got their wind. Yay. Now, if it will make you feel better about this whole thing, there is an alternate version of the story. And I think this is alluded to. In some versions, Artemis feels so sorry for Iphigenia that at the last moment, she replaces Iphigenia with a stag, with a deer, but it still looks like Iphigenia or something. So nobody knows that she's been switched out. And Artemis whisks her away to an island called Taurus. And she serves her as a priestess there. Iphigenia serves as a priestess and she doesn't die. This is in some versions. But in a lot of versions, she just, I think she mentions it in this book. But in a lot of them, she really did get killed. Either way, Clytemnestra, her mother, thinks she was killed, right? Whether she got whisked away or not. So that's gonna come back on us later. They show up at Troy, and it just doesn't seem to be as easy to take Troy as they thought. But here's a question. Why don't the Trojans just give Helen back? I don't think this is really in your book, but wouldn't that be an option?
It said so you think that after all these guys come and get ready, after we just give her back, they're all just going to walk away?
This is a problem. The Greeks did send an embassy. They sent Odysseus and Menelaus in and like, hey, dudes, if you give me back my wife and the stuff he stole, we will leave. We can cut a deal. We can avoid this. But yeah, they leave, and they're like, they're not going to leave. They're going to hold a grudge. They're still going to attack us. And then Paris stands up. He's like, I don't care what you do. I am not giving her back. She's mine, and I'm not giving her back. So I guess it's war. This is the question, Bryn. It is unclear. In some versions, it's kind of like she was kidnapped. But in most versions, she's willing. So in the great poem by Homer that tells us about part of the story, she walks around, I'm sorry, this is kind of harsh language, but most people say, she calls herself a slut. She calls the slut that I am, that I left my husband. She also has a child at home. She's left a child named Hermione, a daughter. And so in most versions, it seems like he was really, really handsome and a good talker, and she just grabbed some of her husband's stuff and ran off with him in the night. Now, to make this even more complicated, Herodotus, our friend with the merry-go-round of death in Scythia, says, I went to Egypt, and I asked about Helen, and here's what they say in Egypt. They say that Paris and Helen took a pit stop in Egypt while they were sailing home. And the king of Egypt found out that this guy had stolen someone else's wife and went and told him, dude, that is not okay. You are leaving that woman here until I can get her back to her husband, and you will leave within 3 days. I don't want your kind here. We don't serve your kind here. You may leave. And so Herodotus said, the Egyptians say Helen was in Egypt all the time. She never was in Troy. And he said, that's why they didn't give her back. He says, the Trojans just kept saying, but she's near. Like, yeah, a likely story. That's not part of the fable. Do you know what I mean? But that's, Herodotus is thinking, if this really happened, why in the world would they not give her back? Like if this was a historical event, wouldn't you like sneak her out a side door in the night and just send her off to the Greek camp or something? Anything to stop the bloodshed? Because guys, this war is going to go on for 10 years. 10 years at Troy. Why would they? Well, you know what they did? I don't think they sent back for more people. But what they did is they just had a habit of sailing around to the neighboring islands and ransacking neighboring cities to get supplies and stuff. And they would press people into service. But I don't think they got more soldiers that way necessarily, but that's how they lived. They just kept going around stealing, plundering, killing people's families and stealing all their stuff to steal. Oh yeah, it's not good. It's not good. So this is where we leave the Trojans at the end of this week's reading. With the time of discouragement, it says, are we ever going to take Troy? Is this going to go on forever? For next week, I would like you to read part 3. We'll just call it TJ, the Trojan War, TW, the Trojan War. Part 3, and in these books, it's pages 75 through 129. This is the big event. Yeah, so you've got 2 paragraphs to write for me. You've got the first 2 parts in the Dorothy Mills chapter, and you've got part 3. Are there any questions or any comments about the Trojan War so far?
Seems like I'm gonna have a rough time winning.
We shall see. If you do not know what's going to happen, you're in for a treat. Like I said, maybe the most famous story in the history of the world, probably. All right, awesome. Please be quiet as you go up the stairs because of the Bible study up there, and I will see you next week.